Imagine you're at a family gathering, the air thick with grief after a loved one's funeral. The room is filled with familiar faces. But one voice cuts through the somber chatter, a voice that dares to say what no one else will. He was murdered, wasn't he? Gasps ripple through the crowd. His eyes dart around, searching for truth or deception. That's exactly what happens in Agatha Christie's gripping mystery. After the funeral, where a single accusation unravels a web of secrets and a cunning killer hiding in plain sight, in this video, we're diving deep into the twists and turns of this classic Hercule Poirot tale, peeling back the layers of a family's dark motives and the brilliant detective work that exposes the truth. Get ready for a journey through suspicion, betrayal, and a mastermind murderer you'll never see coming. Stick with us as we break it down into 10 thrilling chapters, starting right now with the spark that sets it all off. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to join us on this mystery-solving ride. The story begins in the grand, somber halls of Enderby Hall, a sprawling English estate that has seen better days. Its oak-paneled walls and heavy velvet curtains seem to hold the weight of generations. And today, they bear witness to the funeral of Richard Abernethie, the family patriarch and a man of considerable wealth. The air is thick with the scent of lilies and the murmur of polite condolences, but beneath the surface, there's a current of anticipation. Richard's death, though sudden, was attributed to natural causes, a heart condition, the doctor said. But as the family gathers for the reading of his will, the atmosphere shifts from mourning to something far more tense. The Abernethie clan is a mixed bag of personalities, each with their own struggles and dreams, all tied together by the promise of inheritance. There's Timothy, Richard's younger brother, grumbling hypochondriac who's spent years feeling overshadowed and resentful. His wife Maud hovers protectively, her sturdy frame a contrast to his frail complaints. Then there's George, the ambitious nephew with a taste for risky investments, and his sister Susan, a sharp-minded woman with plans to start her own business. Rosamond, the glamorous actress, floats through the room with a dreamy smile, while her husband, Michael, a struggling actor, eyes the proceedings with barely concealed eagerness. Helen Richards, refined sister-in-law, seems calm but watchful. And then there's Cora Lansquenet, the oddball of the family, who's been estranged for years. Living a bohemian life in France with her artist husband, the will reading is held. In the library, where Mr. Entwistle, the family's trusted solicitor, stands at a polished mahogany table, he's a meticulous man with wire-rimmed glasses and a habit of clearing his throat before speaking. As he reads, the terms are straightforward. Richard's fortune, millions in stocks, properties, and cashes, to be divided equally among his surviving relatives. It's a generous sum, enough to change lives, and you can feel the room exhale with relief. But then Cora, perched on a chair in her garish floral dress, tilts her head like a curious bird and says, "It's been hushed up very nicely, hasn't it? But he was murdered, wasn't he?" The words land like a thunderclap. The family stares at her, some with shock, others with irritation. Cora's always been the eccentric one, prone to dramatic outbursts, but this is different. Her tone isn't playful, it's knowing, almost taunting. Timothy snaps that she's talking nonsense, while Rosamond laughs it off. But the seed of doubt is planted. Mr. Entwistle, ever the professional, tries to move on, but Cora's accusation hangs in the air, impossible to ignore. Was Richard's death really as natural as it seemed? The doctor's report was clear, but Cora's certainty makes everyone uneasy. The family disperses, some muttering about Cora's tactlessness, others wondering if there's any truth to her words. The next morning, the plot thickens in the most horrifying way. Cora, who had returned to her modest cottage in a nearby village, is found dead, brutally murdered in her sleep, her skull split open by a hatchet. The news sends shockwaves through the family. Mr. Entwistle is called to the scene, and as he stands in Cora's cluttered cottage, surrounded by her eclectic art collection and half-finished canvases, he can't shake the feeling that this is no coincidence. The timing is too perfect. Cora's accusation at the funeral, followed by her violent death less than 24 hours later, suggests something sinister. What? Did she know something about Richard's death that made her a target? Was her murder a desperate act to silence her? The local police are quick to assume it was a burglary gone wrong. Cora's cottage was isolated. Her valuables were scattered. But Mr. Entwistle isn't convinced. He's known the Abernethie family for decades, and he senses something darker at play. Cora's death feels personal, calculated, and tied to the family's secrets. He decides this case is beyond his expertise. It needs someone with a razor-sharp mind, someone who can see through the fog of lies and pinpoint the truth. That someone is Hercule Poirot, the legendary Belgian detective whose reputation for solving impossible crimes precedes him. Poirot arrives. Quietly, his neat mustache and polished shoes, a stark contrast to the disarray of Enderby Hall. He's not one for grand entrances. But his presence commands attention. With his little gray cells already at work, he listens as Mr. Entwistle recounts the events. Richard's sudden death, Cora's accusation, and her gruesome murder. Rose's eyes gleam with interest. He knows that in a family as complex as the Abernethies' motives are rarely simple. Greed, jealousy, old grudges, any of these could be the key. He begins by asking questions, gentle but probing, about Richard's health, his relationships, and Cora's life. Why did she return after years of absence? What did she mean by hushed up? The family, still reeling from Cora's death, is reluctant to talk, but Poirot is patient. He observes their reactions, noting the nervous glance between Rosamond and Michael. The way Timothy's complaints seem rehearsed, the quiet intensity in Susan's eyes. Each family member is a piece of the puzzle, and Poirot is determined to fit them together. He visits Cora's cottage, examining the crime scene with meticulous care. The hatchet, the overturned furniture, the lack of forced entry, it all tells a story, but not the one the police believe. To Poirot, it's clear. Cora's murder was no random act. It was a deliberate move by someone who feared what she knew. As Poirot digs deeper, he learns that Richard had been in poor health, but was expected to live for years. His death, while convenient for his heirs, wasn't suspicious until Cora spoke up. Her words at the funeral weren't just a wild guess, they were a challenge, a spark that threatened to expose a carefully hidden truth. What did she know? And how did she know it? Was she guessing, or did she have evidence? Poirot suspects that Cora's bohemian lifestyle and long absence from the family might hold clues. She was an outsider, yet she saw something the others missed. Towards something they wanted to keep hidden. The family's reactions to her death are telling. Some are genuinely shaken. Others seem almost relieved. Poirot knows that the killer is likely among them, hiding behind a mask of grief or innocence. The question is, who had the most to gain? From Richard's death, and who was desperate enough to kill Cora to protect their secret? As he prepares to interview the family, Poirot senses the web of deception tightening. Every conversation, every glance, could reveal the next clue or the next lie. This is just the start of a deadly game of cat and mouse, where Poirot must outwit a killer who's already struck twice. Box of suspicion, and her murder is proof that someone will stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. What secrets are hiding in Enderby Hall, and who among this cast of heirs is capable of murder? In the next chapter, we'll follow Poirot as he steps into the lion's den, meeting the Abernethie family face to face and uncovering the first cracks in their carefully crafted stories. If you're hooked on this mystery, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Who do you think Cora was pointing the finger at? Drop your guesses in the comments below and let's unravel this together. Hercule Poirot stands in the drawing room of Enderby Hall, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the Abernethie family. The air is heavy with tension, like a storm about to break. The family members are scattered around the room, some seated on plush armchairs, others standing stiffly, as if bracing for an interrogation. Poirot, with his impeccable suit and calm demeanor, seems almost out of place in this house of secrets, but his presence is magnetic. He's here to ask questions, to probe the cracks in their stories, to find the truth behind Cora's murder and her chilling claim about Richard's death. The family knows he's no ordinary detective. His reputation for unraveling even the most tangled mysteries precedes him. As he begins, his voice is soft but deliberate, each word chosen to unsettle. He starts with simple questions. Where were they the night Cora was killed? What did they think of her accusation? But Poirot isn't just listening to their answers. He's watching their hands, their eyes, the way they shift in their seats. Every gesture is a clue, every hesitation a potential lead taut first. He speaks to Timothy Abernethie, Richard's younger brother, who sprawled on a sofa, clutching a glass of brandy despite the early hour. Timothy is quick to complain, his voice a mix of indignation and self-pity. He insists Cora was always a troublemaker, stirring up drama for attention. She was unhinged, he says, waving a hand dismissively, saying Richard was murdered. Absolute nonsense. The woman was delusional. But Poirot notices the way Timothy's eyes flicker toward his wife, Maud, as if seeking her approval. Maud, a stout woman with a no-nonsense air, nods in agreement, adding that Cora's bohemian lifestyle made her unreliable. Yet there's something guarded in Maud's tone, as if she's rehearsing lines. Poirot makes a mental note. Timothy's bitterness toward Richard runs deep, rooted in years of feeling like the lesser brother. Could that resentment have turned deadly? Maud, her loyalty to Timothy is fierce, but is she protecting him from more than just criticism? Next, Poirot turns to Susan Banks, the practical niece, with a steely gaze. Susan is composed, her answers measured. She admits she found Cora's accusation shocking, but dismisses it as an outburst. Aunt Cora liked to be dramatic, she says, her voice calm but firm. She barely knew Uncle Richard anymore. How could she know anything about his death? Susan's husband, Gregory, a quiet chemist with a nervous habit of adjusting his glasses, agrees, though he says little. Poirot senses ambition in Susan. She's already planning to use her inheritance to start a business. A dream Richard supported. But there's a sharpness in her eyes, a hint that she's calculating more than she lets on. Gregory, on the other hand, seems uneasy, his answers clipped. Poirot wonders if Susan's drive or Gregory's anxiety hides a darker motive. Could one of them have seen Cora as a threat to their plans? Rosamund Shane, the actress, is next, and she's a study in contrasts. Her beauty fills the room, her gestures theatrical, but there's a calculating edge beneath her charm. She laughs off Cora's words, calling them typical Cora, always stirring the pot. Her husband Michael, a handsome but struggling actor, echoes her, though his smile is strained. Poirot notices the way they lean toward each other, as if sharing an unspoken agreement. Rosamund admits she and Michael were in London the night of Cora's murder, performing in a play that flopped. We're not exactly rolling in money, she says with a sigh, but the inheritance will help. Michael's eyes light up at the mention of money, and Poirot catches it. The couple's dreams of stardom depend on Richard's fortune, but would they kill to secure it? And why does Michael seem so tense when Cora's name comes up? Helen Abernethie, Richard's sister-in-law, is the last to be questioned in this round. She's poised, her silver hair neatly pinned, her voice steady. She admits Cora's accusation troubled her, not because she believed it, but because it felt too specific to be a whim. Cora was flighty, Helen says, but she wasn't stupid. If she said something, she had a reason. Helen's honesty surprises Poirot. She's the only one who doesn't outright dismiss Cora's words. She also reveals that Richard had visited her a week before his death, seeming preoccupied, as if something was weighing on him. He mentioned wanting to revise his will, but never got the chance. This piques Poirot's interest. A change in the will could shift motives dramatically. Who stood to lose if Richard had lived longer? Helen's candor makes her seem trustworthy. But Poirot knows appearances can deceive. As the interviews end, Poirot steps outside to the gardens of Enderby Hall, letting the crisp air clear his mind. The family's answers have given him plenty to work with, but no clear answers. Each member has a motive tied to Richard's wealth, and Cora's murder suggests one of them is desperate to keep a secret. Poirot reflects on the crime scene at Cora's cottage, the hatchet, the lack of forced entry, the untouched valuables. It all points to someone who knew her, someone who acted with purpose. He suspects Cora's accusation wasn't a guess, but based on something she saw or heard. Perhaps during her brief return to the family. Was she in contact with Richard before his death? Did she stumble across a clue the others missed? Poirot decides to dig into Cora's life, starting with her time in France and her reappearance at the funeral. Her estranged husband, Pierre Lansquenet, might hold answers, or perhaps her cottage hides more than the police realized. Back inside, the family is restless, their polite masks slipping. Timothy argues with Susan over the estate's future, while Rosamond and Michael whisper in a corner, their faces tense. Poirot knows the killer is watching him, gauging his every move. The challenge is to find the thread that connects Richard's death to Cora's murder before the killer strikes again. He decides to enlist Mr. Entwistle's help, asking him to gather more details about Richard's final days' health, his visitors, his state of mind. Poirot also requests access to Cora's personal belongings, hoping her letters or diaries might reveal what she knew. The puzzle is taking shape, but the pieces are scattered. The killer is counting on staying one step ahead. The stakes are higher now, and Poirot feels the weight of the case. Cora's death was a warning, a sign that someone in this family is willing to kill to protect their secret, but who? The bitter brother, the ambitious niece, the desperate actors, or the composed widow. Each has a reason to want Richard's money, but only one had the nerve to silence Cora. In the next chapter, follow Poirot as he digs into Cora's past, uncovering surprising connections to the Abernethie family and the First Solid. Clue that points to the killer's identity. If you're caught up in this mystery, smash that like button and hit subscribe to keep unraveling the truth with us. Who do you suspect so far? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's see. If you can outsmart Poirot, Hercule Poirot stands at the threshold of Cora Lansquenet's cottage. The late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the overgrown garden. The air is damp, carrying the scent of earth and decay, as if the cottage itself mourns its owners. Brutal end. Inside, the clutter of Cora's bohemian life, brightly colored scarves, half-finished paintings. Stacks of yellowed letters tells a story of a woman who lived on her own terms. Far from the stifling wealth of the Abernethie family, Poirot's mission is clear: to uncover what Cora knew about Richard's death and why it cost her her life. The police have already combed through the cottage, dismissing her murder as a botched robbery, but Poirot trusts his instincts over their reports. A hatchet to the head while she slept, no sign of forced entry, and valuables left untouched, tits to precise for a random crime. Someone knew Cora's habits, her vulnerabilities, and they struck with chilling efficiency. As Poirot sifts through her belongings, he's searching for the spark that ignited her accusation at the funeral. The clue that made her a target. He begins with a small wooden desk, its drawers stuffed with letters and trinkets. Cora's correspondence is a treasure trove, revealing a woman who was both sentimental and sharp-witted. There are letters from her late husband, Pierre, a French artist whose flamboyant prose paints a picture of their unconventional life in Lyon. But one letter, tucked beneath a pile of sketches, catches Poirot's eye. It's from Richard Abernethie, dated just 2 weeks before his death. The handwriting is firm, the tone urgent. Richard writes that he's been reflecting on his legacy and wants to see Cora to discuss a matter of great importance. Mentions feeling uneasy, as if he's being watched, and hints at changes to his will. The letter ends abruptly, as if Richard was interrupted. Poirot's pulse quickens. This is no coincidence. Cora's accusation wasn't a wild guess. She had direct contact with Richard, and whatever he told her set a deadly chain of events in motion. But why didn't she mention this letter at the funeral? Was she protecting someone, or biding her time? Poirot moves to Cora's bedroom, where the crime scene lingers like a ghost. The bed is still unmade, the sheets stained with the tragedy of her final moments. He examines the room carefully, noting the open window, the lack of struggle, the hatchet left on the floor. The killer knew Cora would be alone, vulnerable in the early hours. Poirot pictures the scene, a shadowy figure slipping into the cottage, weapon in hand, striking before Cora could scream. Precision suggests familiarity, perhaps someone who visited her before. He recalls Helen's comment that Cora wasn't stupid. Her accusation at the funeral was calculated. A jab to provoke a reaction. But whose reaction? Poirot suspects the killer was in that room, watching as Cora dropped her bombshell, realizing she knew too much. Back at Enderby Hall, Mr. Entwistle provides more pieces of the puzzle. He's been digging into Richard's final days, as Poirot requested, and shares a troubling detail. Richard had visited his doctor a month before his death, complaining of fatigue and dizziness. The doctor prescribed rest, attributing it to his heart condition, but Richard seemed unconvinced. He also visited Mr. Entwistle, asking vague questions about altering his will to correct an injustice. Entwistle assumed Richard meant redistributing shares among the family, but now he wonders if there was more to it. Poirot listens intently, his mind weaving connections. If Richard suspected foul play or planned to cut someone out of his fortune, it could explain both his death and Cora's. But who stood to lose the most? Timothy, whose resentment of Richard was no secret. Susan, whose business dreams relied on her inheritance? Or perhaps Rosamond and Michael, whose failing careers made them desperate for cash? Poirot decides to probe deeper into Cora's life. In France, he contacts a colleague in Lyon, asking for details about her time there. The response comes quickly. Cora and Pierre lived modestly, surrounded by artists and eccentrics, but they were happy. Pierre died a year ago, leaving Cora alone, and she returned to England shortly after. Intriguingly, she had recently sold a valuable painting from Pierre's collection, giving her a small fortune, yet she lived simply, almost as if hiding her wealth. Poirot wonders if this money played a role in her murder. Did someone in the family know about it? Or was it unrelated, a distraction from the real motive tied to Richard's death? He also learns that Cora had been in touch with Helen before the funeral, asking cryptic questions about Richard's health and visitors. This strengthens Poirot's theory that Cora was piecing together a puzzle of her own, one that led to her death. As evening falls, Poirot returns to Enderby Hall, where the family is gathered for dinner. The atmosphere is strained, with forced small talk barely masking their unease. Timothy complains about the drafty house, Maud fusses over him, and Susan watches everyone with a quiet intensity. Rosamond and Michael, usually charming, seem distracted, their laughter hollow. Helen, ever observant, catches Poirot's eye, as if sensing he's onto something. Over dessert, Poirot casually mentions Richard's letter to Cora, watching for reactions. The room grows quiet. Susan's fork pauses mid-air, Timothy sputters into his wine, and Michael's smile falters. It's a small moment, but Poirot knows he's struck a nerve. Someone here knows more than they're saying. They're terrified he's getting closer to the truth. The day ends with Poirot alone in his room, sketching a mental map of the case. Cora's letter from Richard is a breakthrough, but it raises new questions. What injustice was Richard planning to correct? Who did he suspect was watching him? And how did Cora's knowledge of this threaten the killer? Poirot senses the net is tightening, but the killer is clever, blending seamlessly into the family's dynamics. He resolves to focus on Richard's final days, tracking down anyone who saw him before his death, servants, doctors, even business associates. The truth is buried somewhere in those details, and Poirot is determined to unearth it before the killer strikes again. The mystery is deepening, and the Abernethie family is a powder keg of secrets waiting to explode. Cora's murder was just the beginning, a desperate act to protect a larger crime. In the next chapter, we'll follow Poirot as he uncovers a shocking detail about Richard's death that turns the case upside down, pointing to a suspect no one expected. If you're gripped by this tale of deception, hit that like button and subscribe to keep unraveling the mystery with us. Who do you think is hiding the truth? Drop your theories in the comments, and let's see if you're one step ahead of Poirot. Hercule Poirot sits in the dimly lit study of Enderby Hall, surrounded by towering bookshelves and the faint, musty scent of old leather. The house is quiet now, the family having retired after a tense dinner, but Poirot's mind is anything but. Still, the letter from Richard to Cora, hinting at an injustice and a change to his will, set his little gray cells buzzing. He's convinced that Richard Abernethie's death was no accident. Cora's murder was a desperate attempt to keep that truth buried. But to prove it, Poirot needs evidence, something concrete, to link the two crimes and expose the killer hiding among the family. Today, he's diving into Richard's final days, chasing down every detail, every visitor, every conversation that might reveal what tore who ended his life. The stakes are high, and Poirot knows the killer is watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. But Hercule Poirot does not make mistakes, makes discoveries, and today, he's about to uncover a bombshell that will shake the Abernethie family to its core. Poirot begins by meeting with Abernethie and the solicitors. Cluttered office in London. The older man is visibly shaken, his usual composure fraying as he hands Poirot a file of documents related to Richard's estate. Among them is a medical report from Richard's last visit to his doctor, a Dr. Larrabee, who noted unusual symptoms. Beyond the expected heart condition, Richard had complained of nausea, dizziness, and a metallic taste in his mouth, symptoms that, in hindsight, sound suspiciously like poisoning. Poirot's eyes narrow as he reads. Poison is a subtle weapon, often chosen by someone close, someone trusted. He presses his intwistle for more details. Who had access to Richard's food or medicine? Who visited him in the weeks before his death? Intwistle recalls that Richard was largely alone at Enderby Hall, attended by his loyal butler Lanscombe and a housekeeper, Miss Gilchrist. But there were visitors. Timothy and Maud had stayed for a weekend. Susan and Gregory dropped by to discuss her business plans, and Rosamond and Michael had visited, hoping to secure a loan for their theater ambitions. Even Helen had spent a day with him, discussing family matters. Any one of them could have slipped something into his tea or pills. Poirot decides to visit Dr. Larrabee himself, a kindly but nervous man who practices in a nearby village. The doctor confirms the symptoms, but insists Richard's heart gave out naturally. He was under stress, Dr. Larrabee says, fidgeting with his pen. He mentioned family troubles, something about being disappointed in someone close to him. Poirot presses further, asking if poisoning was considered. The doctor hesitates, then admits it wasn't. Richard's death seemed consistent with his medical history. No autopsy was performed. This strikes Poirot as a critical oversight. Without an autopsy, there's no proof of natural causes. Foul play. He asks Dr. Larrabee to review his notes again, specifically for any mention of arsenic or similar toxins. The doctor promises to check, but Poirot senses reluctance, as if the man fears what he might find. As he leaves, Poirot's mind races. Arsenic would explain the symptoms, and its slow, insidious nature fits a killer who wanted Richard's death to look natural back at Enderby Hall. Poirot turns his attention to the household staff, starting with Lanscombe the butler, who served the Abernethies for decades. Lanscombe is a proud man, his posture rigid despite his age, but his eyes betray worry. Describes Richard's final weeks. Quieter than usual, often lost in thought, and unusually secretive. He'd lock himself in his study for hours, Lanscombe recalls, and he stopped taking his usual evening sherry. Poirot seizes on this detail. Why would Richard, a creature of habit, abandon his routine? Was he suspicious of tampering? Lanscombe also mentions a strange incident. A bottle of Richard's heart medication went missing a week before his death, only to reappear the next day. Poirot's instincts flare. This could be the key. Swapped pill, a doctored dose. It's a classic method for a murderer who wants to avoid suspicion. He asks Lanscombe about the family's visits, and the butler confirms that Timothy, Susan, Rosamond were all at the house during that time. Each had opportunity, but who had the knowledge to use poison? Poirot's next stop is the kitchen, where he interviews Miss Gilchrist, the housekeeper. She's a nervous woman, her hands fluttering as she describes her duties preparing Richard's meals, managing the household, and occasionally administering his medication. She insists everything was normal, but Poirot notices her unease when he mentions Cora. Miss Lanscombe was unpredictable, Miss Gilchrist says, her voice tight. She came to the house a few weeks before Mr. Richard's death, asking all sorts of questions. This is new. Cora had visited Richard before the funeral, unannounced, and their meeting was private. Miss Gilchrist overheard raised voices, though she couldn't make out the words. Poirot presses her. Did Cora seem upset? Did Richard mention her afterward? Miss Gilchrist clams up, claiming she doesn't eavesdrop, but Poirot senses she's hiding something. Was she involved, or is she simply afraid of the killer? The breakthrough comes later that day, when Dr. Larrabee calls with urgent news. After reviewing his notes and consulting a colleague, he confirms that Richard's symptoms align with chronic arsenic poisoning, small doses over time, enough to weaken his heart and mimic a natural death. The revelation is staggering. Richard was murdered, just as Cora suspected, and her own death was almost certainly tied to her knowledge of this crime. Poirot feels the pieces falling into place, but the puzzle is far from complete. Arsenic requires access and planning someone. Who could get close to Richard repeatedly? Someone he trusted. The family's visits take on new significance. Poirot begins to suspect the killer's motive lies in Richard's planned change to his will. If Richard was about to disinherit someone, that person had every reason to act quickly and to silence Cora when she got too close to the truth as night falls. Poirot walks the grounds of Enderby Hall, the stars sharp against the dark sky. The family is restless, their conversations laced with suspicion. Susan and Gregory argue quietly in the library. Timothy complains loudly about Poirot's meddling, and Rosamond and Michael seem to be plotting something in hushed tones. Helen, ever watchful, approaches Poirot, asking if he's made progress. He shares nothing, only smiling politely, but her concern tells him she's as eager for answers as he is. The killer is among them, and Poirot knows they're growing nervous. His questions about Richard's medication and Cora's visit have stirred the pot, and he expects a reaction soon, a slip, a lie, or perhaps another desperate act. The case is heating up, and Poirot is closer than ever to unmasking the murderer. Richard's poisoning changes everything, pointing to a calculated killer who's been playing a long game. But who in this family had the cunning to pull it off, and what drove them to such extremes? In the next chapter, we'll follow Poirot as he zeroes in on a key suspect, uncovering a hidden connection between Cora and the killer that threatens to blow the case wide open. If you're hooked on this deadly mystery, smash that like button and subscribe to stay with us. Go? Who's your top suspect now? Drop your guesses in the comments, and let's see if you can keep up with Poirot's brilliant mind. The morning sun filters through the heavy drapes of Enderby Hall, casting a pale glow over the breakfast table where the Abernethie family sits in uneasy silence. Hercule Poirot sips his coffee, his eyes darting from one face to another, reading the subtle signs of strain. The revelation that Richard Abernethie was likely poisoned with arsenic has sharpened his focus, and he's now certain that Cora's murder was no isolated act. It was the desperate move of a killer protecting their tracks. But the question gnaws at him. How did Cora know about Richard's murder? Her accusation at the funeral was too precise, too confident to be a mere hunch. As Poirot observes the family, Timothy's scowl, Susan's guarded expression, Rosamond's forced cheer, he knows the answer lies in a connection between Cora and the killer. A thread he must find before another life is lost. Today he's diving deeper into Cora's final days, chasing a lead that could expose the murderer's identity and their motive for silencing her. Poirot begins by revisiting Cora's cottage, accompanied by Mr. Entwistle, who's growing increasingly anxious. About the family's secrets, the cottage feels emptier now, its vibrant chaos dimmed by Cora's absence. Poirot sifts through her belongings again, focusing on a small locked box he overlooked before. With Entwistle's permission, he pries it open, revealing a bundle of photographs and a worn notebook. The photos show Cora and Pierre in their lion days, laughing with artists and poets. But one image stands out, a younger Cora with Richard at Enderby Hall, both smiling, a rare moment of sibling warmth. The notebook, however, is the real find. It's filled with Cora's erratic handwriting, a mix of shopping lists, sketches, and cryptic notes. One entry, dated a month before Richard's death, reads R. Says he's made a mistake, trusts the wrong person. Must fix it before it's too late. Another just days before the funeral notes, saw it in his face. He knows I know. Dora's heart races. Cora wasn't guessing she had evidence, or at least a strong suspicion that someone close to Richard was betraying him. But who did she see at the funeral that confirmed her fears? Poirot's next move is to interview Miss Gilchrist, the housekeeper, again. She's in the kitchen, nervously kneading dough, her eyes darting to the door as if expecting an intruder. Poirot's gentle but persistent questions unsettle her. He asks about Cora's visit to Enderby Hall before Richard's death, pressing for details about their argument. Miss Gilchrist fidgets, admitting she overheard more than she let on. Miss Cora was upset, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. She kept saying, "He's not who he seems," and Mr. Richard told her to keep quiet, that it was dangerous. Poirot leans forward, sensing a breakthrough. Who was Cora referring to? Miss Gilchrist clams up, claiming she didn't hear more, but her trembling hands betray her fear. Poirot suspects she knows or fears more than she's saying. Could she be protecting someone? Or is she afraid of becoming the next victim? Back at the hall, Poirot shifts his focus to the family's interactions with Cora. He learns from Helen that Cora had been unusually curious about the family's finances during her visit, asking pointed questions about who stood to gain from Richard's will. This intrigues Poirot. Cora's bohemian lifestyle suggested she cared little for money, so why the sudden interest? He suspects she was probing for motive, trying to confirm her suspicions about Richard's death. Helen also mentions a strange detail. Cora had received a phone call from an unknown caller the day before the funeral, and afterward she seemed agitated, muttering about putting things right. Poirot files this away, wondering if the caller was the killer, warning Cora to stay silent or luring her into a trap to dig deeper. Poirot speaks with Susan and Gregory, who are staying in a guest room at Enderby Hall. Susan is poised. Her answer's polished, but Gregory's nervousness is palpable. When Poirot mentions Cora's notebook and her reference to the wrong person, Agatha, Gregory drops his teacup, the porcelain shattering on the floor. Agatha! He mumbles an apology, but Poirot notes his pallor, the way his hands shake. Susan quickly steps. In explaining that Gregory's been under stress, working long hours at his pharmacy, Poirot nods, but his mind is racing. Gregory, a chemist, would have access to arsenic and the knowledge to use it subtly. Could he be the one Cora suspected? Susan's protectiveness raises another red flag. Is she covering for her husband, or does she have her own secrets? Poirot then corners Rosamond and Michael, who are rehearsing lines for a new play in the drawing room. Their charm is disarming, but Poirot isn't fooled. He asks about their visit to Richard before his death, probing for inconsistencies. Rosamond admits they asked for a loan, which Richard refused, saying he needed to reassess his priorities. Michael's jaw tightens at the memory, and Poirot senses bitterness. When he brings up Cora's accusation, Rosamond laughs it off, but Michael's eyes darken. She was always stirring trouble, he says, a bit too sharply. Poirot wonders if their financial desperation pushed them to extremes. A loan refused could be a motive, especially if Richard planned to cut them out of his will. The day's most startling discovery comes from a phone call with Poirot's contact in Lyon. Cora had been in touch with a private investigator before returning to England, asking him to look into someone in the Abernethie family, someone she described as not what they seem. The investigator found nothing concrete, but Cora's request suggests she was already suspicious before seeing Richard. Poirot connects the dots. Cora's visit to Enderby Hall, her argument with Richard, her cryptic notes, and her accusation. At the funeral, all point to one person she believed was deceiving the family. But who? The answer feels tantalizingly close, yet maddeningly elusive. As night falls, Poirot gathers the family in the library, dropping a calculated hint about the arsenic poisoning. He watches their reactions closely. Timothy's bluster, Maud's silence, Susan's clenched jaw, Gregory's nervous fidgeting, Rosamond's forced smile, Michael's sudden stillness, and Helen's quiet concern. Someone in this room is the killer, and Poirot's probing is making them restless. He knows he's close to exposing the truth, but he also knows the danger is growing. The killer has struck twice. Richard and Cora won't hesitate to kill again to protect their secret. The case is a labyrinth of lies, and Poirot is navigating it with precision. Cora's connection to the killer is clearer now, tied to her suspicions about a family member's true nature. But the final piece of the puzzle, why she was so certain and who she feared, is still missing. In the next chapter, we'll follow Poirot as he uncovers a devastating secret about one of the suspects, a revelation that flips the case on its head and brings him face to face with the killer's motive. If you're loving this twisty mystery, hit that like button and subscribe. To keep unraveling it with us, who's your prime suspect now? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's see if you can outsmart Poirot. The air in Enderby Hall is thick with suspicion as Hercule Poirot paces the library, the flickering firelight casting shadows across the shelves of dusty tomes. The family's reactions to his mention of arsenic poisoning linger in his mind each glance, stutter a clue to the killer's identity. Cora's cryptic notes and her accusation at the funeral point to someone in the Abernethie circle, someone she believed was not what they seem. Poirot is certain that this deception is the key to unraveling both Richard's murder and Cora's brutal death. His investigation has reached a critical point. The killer is feeling the pressure, and Poirot knows they might act again to protect their secret. Today, he's chasing a lead from Cora's notebook and her inquiries in France, determined to uncover the devastating truth about one of the suspects, a truth that could blow the case wide open and reveal the motive behind the murders. Poirot begins by revisiting the family's alibis for the night of Cora's murder, cross-referencing them with new information from Mr. Entwistle. The solicitor has been digging into the family's movements, and he shares a troubling detail. Gregory Banks, Susan's chemist husband, was not at home the night Cora was killed. Despite Susan's claim that they were together in London, Gregory told her he was working late at his pharmacy, but the shop's night watchman says it was closed by 8.
Oh.
Where was Gregory? Poirot's suspicions about him deepen his access to arsenic, his nervous demeanor, and now a shaky alibi make him a prime suspect. Poirot knows better than to leap to conclusions. Gregory's anxiety could stem from guilt, fear, or something else entirely. To test this, Poirot decides to confront him, but subtly, in a way that might provoke a revealing reaction. He finds Gregory in the garden, pruning roses with a distracted air. Poirot approaches with his usual charm, asking casual questions about Gregory's work as a chemist, a profession of precision. Poirot muses, where one must know the effects of every substance. Yes. Gregory nods, his hands trembling slightly as he snips a thorn. When Poirot mentions arsenic, Gregory's face pales, and he mutters something about its use in old prescriptions. Poirot presses further, asking where Gregory was the night Cora died. With Susan, he says quickly, too quickly, his eyes darting away. Poirot doesn't push harder. He's planted the seed and will watch how Gregory reacts. As he walks away, he notices Susan observing them from a window, her expression unreadable. Is she protecting Gregory, or does she suspect him too? Next, Poirot turns his attention to a lead from Cora's lion investigator. The man sends a report confirming that Cora had been asking about a family member's past, specifically their identity and background. She was particularly interested in documents, birth records, marriage certificates that might reveal discrepancies. Poirot puzzles over this. Was Cora questioning someone's legitimacy in the family, perhaps their right to inherit? He recalls her notebook entry. He's not who he seems. The pronoun suggests a male suspect, Timothy, Gregory, or Michael, but the context is unclear. Poirot decides to investigate the family's legal records, enlisting Mr. Entwistle to pull documents from the Abernethie estate. Among them is a marriage certificate for Rosamond and Michael Shane, dated just 2 years ago. Something catches Poirot's eye. Michael's birthplace is listed as a small town in Ireland, but a previous conversation with Rosamond mentioned him growing up in London. It's a minor inconsistency, perhaps, but Poirot's instincts tell him it's worth pursuing. To dig deeper, Poirot interviews Rosamond, alone in the drawing room. She's radiant as ever, her actresses poise masking any nerves. He asks about Michael's background, framing it as curiosity about their glamorous life. Rosamond describes meeting Michael at a theater audition, charmed by his talent and ambition. But when Poirot probes about his family, her answers grow vague. Oh, he doesn't talk much about his past, she says with a laugh. He's a bit of a mystery, even to me. Poirot senses she's holding back, perhaps unaware of how much. He decides to contact a colleague in Ireland to check Michael's records, suspecting that his identity might be the deception. Cora uncovered. If Michael isn't who he claims, it could explain why Richard refused their loan and why. Cora's accusation threatened him. The day's breakthrough comes unexpectedly when Poirot re-examines Cora's photographs. Among them is a faded picture of a young man who resembles Michael, but the back is inscribed with a different name, Miles, 1938. The date and name don't align with Michael's supposed age or history. Poirot's mind races. Could Michael be an imposter? Someone who infiltrated the family for a share of Richard's wealth? If Cora recognized him from her past, perhaps from her bohemian circles in France, her accusation at the funeral might have been a direct challenge to his identity. Poirot recalls Michael's tense reaction when Cora's name came up, his quick dismissal of her words. The pieces are falling into place, but Poirot needs more evidence to confirm his theory. He decides to test Michael by arranging a casual conversation in the library. Inviting Helen to join as a neutral observer, Poirot mentions the photograph, describing it vaguely, but watching Michael's reaction. A curious picture from Cora's collection, he says, a young man from years ago. It's quite striking. Michael's smile freezes, and he changes the subject, but Poirot catches the flicker of panic in his eyes. Helen, perceptive as always, asks if the photo could be connected to Cora's murder. Poirot deflects, keeping his cards close, but he's now certain Michael is hiding something significant. The question is whether Rosamond knows her if she's another victim of his deception. As evening settles over Enderby Hall, the family grows more agitated. Timothy snaps at Maud over a trivial matter. Susan and Gregory avoid each other, and Rosamond clings to Michael's arm, her usual confidence waning. Poirot senses the killer's desperation mounting. The arsenic, the hatchet, the lies, they all point to a carefully orchestrated plan. But Michael's possible false identity is the most explosive clue yet. If he's not who he claims, his motive for killing Richard to secure a share of the inheritance becomes clear. Cora, with her sharp eyes and old connections, was a threat he couldn't ignore. But Poirot knows he must tread carefully. A cornered killer is dangerous, and he's not ready to reveal his hand. The case is a tangled web, and Poirot is unraveling it, thread by thread. Michael's secret could be the key to the murders, but other suspects Gregory's shaky alibi. Timothy's bitterness, even Susan's ambitions still cloud the picture. In the next chapter, we'll follow Poirot as he digs into Michael's past, uncovering a trail of lies that leads to a confrontation that could unmask the killer war, put Poirot in their crosshairs. If you're gripped by this twisting mystery, smash that like button and subscribe to keep unraveling it with us. Is Michael the killer? Or is someone else pulling the strings? Drop your theories in the comments, and let's see if you can outsmart Poirot. The wind howls outside Enderby Hall, rattling the ancient windows as Hercule Poirot sits at a small writing desk, his notebook filled with meticulous scribbles. The photograph of Miles, 1938, and Michael Shane's evasive behavior have ignited Poirot's suspicions, pointing to a possible imposter in the Abernethie family. If Michael is not who he claims, his motive for murdering Richard to secure a share of the inheritance and silencing Cora, who may have recognized him, becomes chillingly clear. But Poirot is a man of evidence, not assumptions, and he knows. The killer's web of lies is intricate. The family is on edge, their polite facades crumbling under his relentless probing. Tonight, Poirot is determined to follow the trail of Michael's past, hoping to confirm his theory and uncover the truth behind the murders, but he also knows that every step closer to the killer increases the danger. He must move carefully to avoid becoming the next target. Poirot begins by contacting his colleague in Ireland, requesting a thorough check on Michael Shane's background. The response arrives swiftly. It's explosive. There's no record of a Michael Shane born in the Irish town listed on his marriage certificate. Instead, the name Miles Connolly appears in old police records, a petty con artist known for forging documents and charming his way into wealthy circles in the 1930s. The description matches the young man in Cora's photograph, down to the sharp jawline and charismatic smile. Poirot's pulse quickens. If Michael is Miles Connolly, he's been playing a long game, marrying Rosamond to infiltrate the Abernethie family and claim a piece of Richard's fortune. But how did Cora know him? Poirot suspects their paths crossed in France, where Cora's bohemian circle of artists and drifters might have included a young conman like Miles. Her note about someone not being who they seem now feels like a direct accusation against Michael. To test this, Poirot visits Rosamond in her room, where she's sorting through costume jewelry with a distracted air. He mentions the photograph casually, describing Miles as an old friend of Cora's from her lion days. Rosamond's reaction is subtle, but telling. She pauses, her fingers tightening around a necklace, and says she doesn't know anyone by that name. But her eyes flicker with unease, and Poirot wonders if she's protecting Michael or genuinely unaware of his past. He decides not to press her yet, instead asking about her and Michael's financial struggles. Rosamond admits they've been desperate, relying on Richard's goodwill to fund their theater dreams. He promised to help us, she says, her voice tinged with frustration, but then he changed his mind, said he had to rethink everything. Poirot nods, filing away this confirmation of Richard's plan to alter his will, a plan that might have excluded Michael, giving him a motive for murder. Next, Poirot seeks out Helen, the family's quiet observer, in the conservatory. She's tending to a wilting orchid, her hands steady, but her face lined with worry. Poirot trusts her insight and shares a carefully edited version of his suspicions about Michael, framing it as a hypothetical. Helen listens intently, then reveals a crucial detail during Cora's visit to Enderby Hall. She had asked Helen about Michael's background, wondering how well Rosamond knew him. Cora seemed suspicious, Helen says. She mentioned seeing someone like him years ago, in a different life. This confirms Poirot's theory. Cora recognized Michael from her past, perhaps as Miles Connolly, and her questions threatened to expose him. If Richard was also suspicious, as his letter to Cora suggested, Michael had every reason to act quickly. Poisoning Richard to secure his share and killing Cora to silence her, Poirot decides to confront Michael directly, but with his usual finesse, choosing the library for the encounter. He invites Mr. Entwistle to join, knowing the solicitor's presence will add pressure. Michael arrives, his charm dialed up, but his eyes wary. Poirot begins with innocent questions about his acting career, then shifts to his past. You grew up in London, yes? Poirot asks, knowing the lie. Michael nods, but his smile is tight. Poirot mentions the photograph, describing Miles in vivid detail, and watches as Michael's composure cracks. I don't know any Miles, he snaps, his voice sharp. Cora collected all sorts of nonsense. But his hands clench, and Poirot knows he's hit a nerve. He doesn't accuse Michael outright. Instead, he lets the silence linger, giving Michael room to betray himself. As Michael leaves, Poirot notices him glance at Rosamond, who's hovering nearby, and wonders if she's complicit or another pawn in his scheme to solidify his case. Poirot examines Richard's study, where the missing bottle of heart medication was last seen. With Lanscome's help, he searches the desk and finds a hidden compartment containing a small vial, half empty, with a faint chemical odor. Poirot suspects it's the arsenic used to poison Richard, carefully administered in small doses to mimic a heart attack, sends it to a trusted chemist for analysis. Knowing the results could confirm Michael as the killer or point to someone else entirely. Gregory's access to chemicals keeps him in the frame, and Timothy's bitterness can't be ignored. Even Susan's ambition and Maud's loyalty to Timothy raise questions. Poirot knows the killer is clever, covering their tracks with precision. But this vial could be the mistake he's been waiting for. As the day ends, Poirot gathers the family for tea, dropping subtle hints about his progress. He mentions the vial, watching for reactions. Michael's face remains impassive, but Gregory fidgets. And Timothy launches into a tirade about interfering detectives. Susan calms him, but her eyes are sharp, calculating. Poirot senses the killer is rattled, their carefully laid plans unraveling. He knows he's close to unmasking them, but the danger's palpable. If Michael is Miles Connolly, he's a man with nothing to lose, a man who's killed twice and won't hesitate to kill again. Poirot must act quickly but with precision. To trap him before he strikes, the mystery is tightening, and Poirot is closing in on the truth. Michael's hidden past is a bombshell, but is he the mastermind, or is someone else manipulating the family's secrets? In the next chapter, we'll follow Poirot as he receives the chemist's report and stages a dramatic confrontation that forces the killer to make a move, bringing him closer to unmasking the murderer, putting himself in deadly danger. You're hooked on this gripping tale. Smash that like button and subscribe to keep unraveling it with us. Is Michael the killer, or is there another twist waiting? Drop your guesses in the comments, and let's see if you can outsmart Poirot. The grand dining room of Enderby Hall glows under the soft light of a chandelier, but the atmosphere is anything but warm. Hercule Poirot stands at the head of the table, his posture impeccable, his eyes scanning the Abernethie family as they shift uncomfortably in their seats. The discovery of the vial in Richard's study, possibly containing arsenic, has brought Poirot tantalizingly close to unmasking the killer. Michael Shane's hidden past is Miles Connolly, con artist with a motive to secure Richard's inheritance. Makes him the prime suspect, but Poirot's instincts warn him not to rule out others. Gregory's shaky alibi, Susan's ambition, or even Timothy's deep-seated resentment. Cora's murder, a brutal act to silence her suspicions, looms over the case, and Poirot knows the killer is growing desperate. Tonight, he's awaiting the chemist's report on the vial and planning a dramatic confrontation to force the murderer's hand. The trap is set, but in a house full of lies, Poirot must tread carefully to ensure the killer is caught. Without becoming their next victim, Poirot begins by gathering intelligence from the family under the guise of discussing the progress of their inheritance. He observes their interactions closely, noting how the strain of his investigation has frayed their nerves. Timothy, nursing a headache, snaps at Maud, who fusses over him with a strained patience that hints at her own unease. Susan, ever composed, engages Poirot in small talk about the estate's future, but her eyes betray a calculating watchfulness, as if she's measuring his every word. Gregory, sitting beside her, is a bundle of nerves, his fingers drumming on the table, avoiding eye contact. Rosamond and Michael, usually a dazzling pair, seem subdued. Rosamond's laughter is forced, and Michael's charm feels brittle, like a mask about to crack. Helen, the family's quiet anchor, watches everyone with a mix of concern and curiosity, her silence speaking volumes. Poirot senses the killer is in this room, their composure slipping as he tightens the net. The chemist's report arrives late in the afternoon, delivered by a courier to Mr. Entwistle, who hands it to Poirot with a grave expression. The vial contained traces of arsenic, diluted but potent enough to kill over time, definitive proof that Richard was poisoned. Poirot's theory is confirmed, but the vial's location in Richard's study raises new questions. Who had access to it? The study was rarely locked, and Lanscombe, the butler, confirms that Timothy, Susan, Rosamond, and Michael all visited Richard there in his final weeks. Gregory, too, had been in the house, though he claimed to stay in the guest wing. Poirot suspects the killer hid the vial in the study's secret compartment, intending to retrieve it later, but Richard's sudden death and Cora's accusation disrupted their plan. This mistake could be their undoing, and Poirot decides to use it to provoke a reaction. He orchestrates a gathering in the library, inviting the family under the pretense of sharing an update on the investigation. The room is heavy with anticipation as Poirot begins, his voice calm but laced with authority. He reveals the arsenic finding, watching as the family reacts. Timothy blusters about incompetent doctors. Maud's face tightens, Susan's eyes narrow. Gregory drops his pen. Rosamond gasps theatrically, and Michael's jaw clenches. Poirot then mentions the vial's discovery in the study, hinting that fingerprints might have been found. It's a bluff. Poirot knows the vial was wiped clean, but he's banking on the killer's paranoia. The truth, he says, is very close now. The one who placed the vial there cannot hide much longer. The room falls silent, and Poirot feels the weight of their stares, each wondering if he's speaking to them. Michael breaks the tension with a forced laugh, calling it all rather dramatic. But his eyes dart to Rosamond, who looks pale. Gregory mumbles something incoherent, and Susan quickly changes the subject. Poirot knows he's stirred the pot, and now he must watch for the killer's next move to keep the pressure on. Poirot interviews Lanscombe again, asking about the study's visitors in detail. The butler recalls an odd moment. Michael had lingered in the study after a meeting, with Richard claiming to admire the bookshelves, but Lanscombe thought he seemed nervous. This strengthens Poirot's suspicions about Michael, whose con artist past as Miles Connolly fits the profile of a calculated poisoner. But Poirot also probes Gregory's movements, learning that he'd asked Lanscombe about Richard's medication, claiming concern for his health. This raises a red flag. Gregory's chemistry expertise makes him a viable suspect. His weak alibi for Cora's murder night is troubling. Poirot decides to cross-check Gregory's pharmacy records, hoping to find evidence of arsenic purchases, while continuing to investigate Michael's Irish connections. Later, Poirot speaks with Helen privately, seeking her perspective on Michael's behavior. She admits he's always been charming but elusive about his past, and Cora's questions about him during her visit had unsettled her. Helen also shares a new detail. Richard had confided in her about a betrayal within the family, someone he'd trusted who disappointed him deeply. Poirot wonders if this was Michael, whose false identity would have infuriated Richard if discovered. But Helen's words also echo Cora's notebook, suggesting Richard suspected someone close, perhaps not just Michael, but another family member working with him. Could Rosamond be involved, knowingly or not? Or is Gregory's nervousness a sign of complicity? As night falls, Poirot notices a subtle shift in the house. Michael and Rosamond retire early, whispering urgently as they climb the stairs. Gregory lingers in the hall, staring at the study door, then hurries away when he sees Poirot. Timothy and Maud argue in hushed tones, their voices carrying through the walls. Poirot senses the killer is planning a desperate act. To throw him off or eliminate another threat, he decides to set a final trap, planting a rumor through Lanscombe that he's found a witness to Cora's murderer, lie designed to panic the killer into revealing themselves. He also asks Mr. Entwistle to keep an eye on the family's movements, knowing the killer might try to flee or destroy evidence. The tension in Enderby Hall is a powder keg, and Poirot has lit the fuse. The arsenic vial in Michael's hidden past point to a cunning murderer. But Gregory's behavior and the family's tangled motives keep the truth just out of reach. In the next chapter, we'll follow Poirot as the killer takes the bait, leading to a heart-stopping moment that exposes their identity or puts Poirot in the crosshairs of a deadly plan. If you're gripped by this deadly game of cat and mouse, smash that like button and subscribe to keep unraveling it with us. Is Michael the mastermind, or is another suspect about to crack? Drop your theories in the comments and let's see if you can outsmart Poirot. The moon casts a silvery glow over Enderby Hall, its eerie light filtering through the tall windows as Hercule Poirot stands in the shadowed hallway, listening to the creaks of the old house. His trap is in motion, the rumor of a witness to Cora's murder, spread through Lanscombe, has set the family on edge, and the discovery of the arsenic vial has tightened the noose around the killer's neck. Poirot is convinced that Michael Shane, with his hidden past as Miles Connolly, is the prime suspect, but Gregory Banks' nervous behavior and access to chemicals keep him in the frame. The family's web of motives, greed, betrayal, desperation has made every step treacherous, and Poirot knows the killer is cornered, ready to lash out. Tonight, he's watching for the reaction his trap will provoke, a slip that could unmask the murderer behind Richard's poisoning and Cora's brutal death. But in this deadly game, Poirot must be prepared for anything, including the possibility that the killer will strike again to protect their secret. Poirot begins by observing the family at breakfast, where the tension is palpable. Timothy is unusually quiet, his usual complaints replaced by a brooding silence, while Maud hovers protectively, her eyes darting to Poirot with suspicion. Susan maintains her composure, but her tight smile betrays her strain, and Gregory is a wreck, spilling his coffee and avoiding conversation. Rosamond and Michael, seated together, seem oddly detached, their usual charm dulled by something unspoken. Helen, ever observant, catches Poirot's eye, as if sensing the storm brewing. Poirot drops a subtle hint about the witness, mentioning to Mr. Entwistle within earshot that he's expecting a visitor with significant information. The effect is immediate. Michael's fork pauses mid-air, Gregory's face pales, and even Susan's gaze sharpens. Poirot knows the killer is rattled, and he's ready to push them further, to tighten the screws. Poirot requests a private meeting with Gregory in the study. The chemist is visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he sits across from Poirot. Poirot begins gently, asking about Gregory's pharmacy work and his knowledge of arsenic. "Substance you handle with care, no doubt," Poirot says, his tone probing. Gregory stammers that arsenic hasn't been used in prescriptions for years, but his voice cracks, and he wipes sweat from his brow. When Poirot mentions the vial found in Richard's study, Gregory's eyes widen, and he blurts out, "I never touched it." "I swear." Poirot raises an eyebrow. Gregory's outburst is telling, but is it guilt or fear? He shifts tactics, asking where Gregory was the night Cora was killed. Gregory repeats his claim of being at the pharmacy, but his story falters, contradicting earlier details. Poirot doesn't press further. He's sown doubt, and will watch how Gregory reacts under pressure. Next, Poirot turns his attention to Michael. Catching him alone in the garden, where he's smoking a cigarette with a restless air, Poirot mentions the Irish records, hinting that discrepancies in Michael's background have surfaced. "A man's past can catch up with him," Poirot says, his eyes locked on Michael's. The actor's charm slips, his smile turning cold. "I don't know what you're implying," he says, flicking ash to the ground. "My past is none of your business." But his voice is tight, and Poirot notices his hand shake as he lights another cigarette. Poirot mentions Cora's photograph of Miles, watching as Michael's jaw clenches. "She collected old memories," Michael says dismissively, but his eyes betray panic. Poirot lets him stew. Knowing the rumor of a witness will push Michael or the true killer to act. That afternoon, Poirot receives a call from his Irish contact, confirming that Miles Connolly vanished after a scam in Dublin, rumored to have reinvented himself in England. The timeline fits Michael's arrival in Rosamond's life, and Poirot is now certain he's an imposter. But a new detail complicates the picture. Miles was known to work with a partner, someone who helped forge documents and manipulate targets. Could Rosamond be involved, or is there another accomplice in the family? Poirot recalls Susan's protectiveness over Gregory and Maud's fierce loyalty to Timothy. The killer might not be acting alone, and this possibility makes the trap even more critical. As evening approaches, Poirot's rumor bears fruit. Lanscombe reports that he overheard Michael and Rosamond arguing in their room, with Michael saying, "We can't let him ruin everything." Meanwhile, Gregory was seen slipping out of the house after dark, heading toward the village. Poirot instructs Mr. Entwistle to follow Gregory discreetly while he keeps an eye on Michael. Late that night, Poirot's vigilance pays off. He hears a creak on the stairs and follows silently, catching Michael sneaking into the study. Poirot watches from the shadows as Michael searches the desk, clearly looking for the vial or other evidence. Suddenly, a noise from the hall startles him and he flees, leaving a drawer ajar. Poirot examines it and finds a hidden letter from Richard to Mr. Entwistle, outlining his intent to disinherit someone unworthy of his trust. The letter doesn't name Michael explicitly, but the timing aligns with his visit. Moments later, Mr. Entwistle returns with news. Gregory was seen entering Cora's cottage, carrying a small bag. Poirot's mind races. Could Gregory be destroying evidence? Or is he a red herring, distracted by his own guilt? Poirot decides to act, gathering the family in the drawing room under the pretense of a breakthrough. He reveals the letter, watching as Michael's face hardens and Gregory shrinks in his seat. The killer believed they could outwit justice, Poirot says, but their actions tonight have betrayed them. He pauses, letting the tension build, then announces that the witness will arrive tomorrow. It's another bluff, but it works. Michael stands abruptly, claiming a headache, while Gregory mumbles an excuse and follows. Poirot knows one of them will crack, but he also senses danger. His trap has pushed the killer to the edge, as the family disperses. Poirot stays in the drawing room, his senses on high alert. He hears a faint rustle outside the window and peers out, catching a glimpse of a figure moving toward the garage. He follows, keeping to the shadows, and sees Michael tampering with a car-pro's car. The implication is chilling. The killer plans to eliminate him, perhaps staging an accident. Poirot retreats, his heart pounding, and resolves to confront the family at dawn, before the killer can act. The net is closing, but the danger is at its peak. The case is a heartbeat away from resolution. But the killer's desperation makes every moment perilous. Michael's actions and Gregory's suspicious behavior point to a dramatic showdown. But Poirot must stay one step ahead to survive. In the next chapter, we'll witness Poirot's final gambit, a stunning revelation that unmasks the killer and ties together every clue in a breathtaking climax. If you're gripped by this deadly mystery, smash that like button and subscribe to see it through with us. Who's the killer, Michael? Gregory? Or someone else entirely? Drop your guesses in the comments, and let's see if you can outsmart Poirot. The dawn breaks over Enderby Hall, painting the estate in hues of gold and gray. But the beauty is lost on Hercule Poirot as he prepares for the final act of this deadly drama. The night's events, Michael tampering with his car, Gregory's suspicious trip to Cora's cottage, and the family's unraveling composure have brought the case to a boiling point. Poirot knows the killer, cornered by his carefully laid trap and the rumor of a non-existent witness, is on the verge of collapse. The arsenic vial, Michael's hidden past, as Miles Connolly, and Cora's cryptic notes all point to a cunning murderer who poisoned Richard Abernethie to secure his fortune and silenced Cora to protect their secret. But Poirot's instincts warn him that the truth is more complex, with threads of deception tying the family together in ways he's only beginning to unravel. Today, he will stage a dramatic confrontation, using every clue to unmask the killer in a climactic reveal that will shock the Abernethies to their core. The stage is set. Poirot's little gray cells are ready to deliver justice. Poirot gathers the family in the grand drawing room. The heavy curtains drawn back to let the morning light expose every nervous glance and trembling hand. Timothy slumps in an armchair, his face pale with irritation. Maud stands beside him, her expression a mix of defiance and worry. Susan sits rigidly, her eyes locked on Poirot, while Gregory fidgets beside her, his glasses slipping down his nose. Rosamond and Michael, usually so poised, are visibly tense, their hands clasped tightly together. Helen, calm but alert, watches from the sidelines. Mr. Entwistle hovers near the door, his solicitor's calm fraying. Poirot begins with a slow, deliberate pace, his voice commanding the room. Mes amis, he says, 2 murders have stained this family. Richard Abernethie, poisoned with arsenic, and Cora Lansquenet, killed to silence her knowledge. Today, the truth will be revealed. He starts by laying out the evidence, Richard's symptoms, the arsenic vial in the study, Cora's accusation at the funeral, and her brutal murder hours later. The family shifts uncomfortably as he describes the killer's motive. Richard's plan to change his will, cutting out someone he deemed unworthy. Poirot then turns to Michael, his gaze piercing. Monsieur Shane, or should I say Miles Connolly? The room gasps. Rosamond's hand flies to her mouth, and Michael's face hardens, but he doesn't speak. Poirot reveals the Irish records, the photograph labeled Miles, 1938, and Cora's suspicion that someone was not who they seem. He accuses Michael of infiltrating the family, marrying Rosamond to claim Richard's wealth, and poisoning him when he threatened to disinherit him. Michael's charm crumbles, his voice sharp as he denies it. You've got no proof, he snaps, but his eyes dart to Rosamond, who looks stunned. As if learning her husband's past for the first time, Poirot shifts focus, turning to Gregory. And you, Monsieur Banks? Where were you the night Cora died? Gregory stammers, repeating his pharmacy alibi, but Poirot reveals the watchman's testimony that the shop was closed. He describes Gregory's visit to Cora's cottage last night, suggesting he was destroying evidence. Susan leaps to his defense, her voice fierce, but Gregory's silence is damning. Poirot then unveils the final clue, A letter found in Cora's cottage, written by Richard after her visit. It reads, "I fear I've trusted the wrong person. If anything happens to me, look to the one closest to my heart." Poirot pauses, letting the words sink in. The family assumes Richard meant a blood relative. But Poirot has another theory, one that flips the case upside down. With a flourish, Poirot reveals the true killer, Miss Gilchrist, the housekeeper. The room erupts in shock. Miss Gilchrist, who has been quietly serving tea in the background, drops a cup, her face ashen. Poirot explains. Miss Gilchrist, overlooked by the family, was Richard's confidant, trusted with his meals and medication. She was not a housekeeper by choice, but a woman with grand ambitions. Once a tea shop owner whose business failed, leaving her bitter and desperate. When Richard confided his plan to change his will, favoring Susan for her business acumen, Miss Gilchrist saw her chance to secure a fortune. She began poisoning Richard with arsenic, stolen from an old supply in the house, knowing his death would be blamed on his heart condition. Cora's visit, where she noticed Miss Gilchrist's unusual attentiveness to Richard, sparked suspicion. When Cora voiced her accusation at the funeral, Miss Gilchrist, present as a servant, panicked and killed her with a hatchet to silence her. Staging it as a robbery, Poirot reveals how Miss Gilchrist planted the vial in the study to frame Michael, whose shady past she'd overheard Cora discussing. She also manipulated Gregory's nervous behavior to cast suspicion on him. Knowing his access to chemicals made him a plausible suspect. The letter from Richard, found in Cora's cottage, was the final clue. His reference to the one closest to my heart wasn't a relative but Miss Gilchrist, who nursed him in his final days. Her motive was simple. With Richard's death, she planned to blackmail the family, claiming knowledge of the killer to extort money. Michael's tampering with Poirot's car and Gregory's cottage visit were red herrings, driven by their own fears of being exposed for lesser secrets. Michael's con artist past and Gregory's history of mental instability. Miss Gilchrist, cornered, tries to flee, but Mr. Entwistle blocks the door. She collapses, sobbing, confessing to both murders, her dreams of wealth undone by Poirot's brilliance. The family is stunned, their relief mixed with horror at how close they came to being deceived. Poirot wraps up, explaining that the killer's greatest mistake was underestimating Cora's perceptiveness and his own ability to see through their lies. As Miss Gilchrist is led away by the police, summoned by Entwistle, the Abernethies grapple with the truth, their family forever changed. The case is closed. But its echoes linger in Enderby Hall. Poirot's genius has exposed a killer hiding in plain sight, a woman whose quiet presence masked a deadly ambition. This mystery has kept us on the edge of our seats, and I hope you've loved unraveling it as much as I have. If you enjoyed this journey through After the Funeral, smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling deep dives into Agatha Christie's world. Who did you suspect until the end? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about how Poirot outsmarted us all.